It's back, part 3 of the Traxxas Craniac Project, and I've got more aluminum upgrades to put on it. What's going on, everybody? Greg here with RC Driver, and thanks again for tuning into our Craniac Project. We've got some more neat stuff to put on the truck today, but if you could do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and the notifications button, that'll get you checked in so you can make sure you can see more of what's happening with this project in the future. I am really excited to get these parts installed. I have the shock caps here. These aluminum shock caps from Traxxas go right onto the stock plastic bodies. And then I went ahead and got all of the aluminum turnbuckles. This is going to be a big project right here, but these are cool looking turnbuckles. I'm going to talk to you about these turnbuckles before you go out and purchase them, so make sure you watch the entire video. Oh, hey, you are still watching. Cool. All right, I want to talk to you about these parts first before you go and install them. So I want to start with the shock caps. These are a great upgrade. If you're going to stick with the stock shocks, these are a nice upgrade to have, because what can happen is I've seen a lot of people manage to rip the shock cap off of the body, and these prevent that from happening. The shock is actually a very good shock, but there is a small potential weakness there at the cap, and this fixes that problem. So I'm going to show you how to install these. Plus they look really cool, and they're aluminum. But this is what I really wanted to talk to you about, and some of you may be scratching your head because you know that I'm building this for my 7-year-old son, and you may be saying, well, why are you going to put aluminum tie rods on that truck? He's just going to break them. These are actually a very good tie rod. They're a pretty strong tie rod, and yes, they can break. I have broken them. Actually, my sons have another truck with these on them, and they didn't break them, but one of their friends did, and that's when he hit a concrete wall. So they're actually a really nice tie rod. They're blue anodized aluminum. They give the truck a great look to it. They allow you to adjust the camber if you wanted to do so. But I really liked them and said, hey, why not put them on again? And I get to show you guys how to do it. So I'm going to start off with replacing these shock caps, and as you can see, I've already removed the wheels just to make my life a little bit easier. Now, to remove the shocks, it requires a Phillips screwdriver. I'm going to use a power driver with a Phillips bit, and I'm just going to remove all the shocks. Actually, I'm just going to remove the fronts for now. Just pull the hardware off, set it aside. Now you're going to want to disassemble your shock. Set the springs and the perches aside. Now I'll just grab my new shock caps. And this is the part where you may need some paper towels. Make sure you have some oil on hand just in case. So before you start to disassemble your shock, what you want to do is make sure it is nice and clean on the outside. You don't want to transfer any dirt to the inside of the shock. Now we need to remove the cap, and they are typically on there pretty tight. So what I like to do is take my screwdriver, and while I hold the body, I can just twist the cap off. Slowly remove the stock cap, and as you can see, I was able to pull it off with the bladder still in place. So now with the cap off, here's a little trick that I do. I push the shaft up just a little bit. I take my screwdriver, push down on the bladder, and you see a little drop of oil come out, and then I'll pull that shaft down with my other fingers, and that pulls the bladder in just slightly more than it was. And now it gives me the ability to slide the cap back on and tighten it down and still have a shock that is nice and smooth without any air inside. Then stick the screwdriver back in and give it one little extra nudge to make sure it's nice and tight. No damage to the shock, and it feels nice and smooth. Now we could go ahead, the shock with the spring perches, the spring, and then the lower perch. Nice and smooth. Now, for example, what happens if the bladder came out while you were disassembling the shock? Well, if the shock lost any oil, or even if it looks like it needs a rebuild, now is a good time to swap out oils. This looks pretty good still. So I'm just going to add a drop of oil, reseat the bladder. This is where you want that paper towel. We'll push up on the shaft slightly again. Take our screwdriver, we'll push down in the center of the bladder. So it's nice and seated. Pull back down on that shaft. Now we can take our shock cap and screw it on. It's slow and smooth, and you shouldn't have a problem knocking the bladder off the seat. Wipe off any excess oil. Now the shock has no air inside. It's nice and smooth. Slide your shock parts back on. Then we can install these back on the truck, and then you can repeat the steps in the rear. Actually, with the shocks off, now is a great time to replace the camber links and the steering rods, both front and rear. So I'm going to start with that right now. And that starts with removing all the links on the top. And as you can see, they're just Phillips screws. So I'll get my power driver and remove those. Next, I want to remove the steering links. So to do that, I'm going to center my servo, remove the servo saver, pop that off. Now I'm going to remove the nuts from the outside steering blocks, and I can slide out the steering assembly. These long links are used to replace the stock steering links here. Part number 2336A. And Traxxas includes an instruction sheet for the installation, which gives you some size suggestions for the vehicle that you have. And luckily, these are already set for the Stampede base chassis, so all I have to do is swap out the links. One thing to keep note of are there are little indexes on these tie rods here, and Traxxas suggests you put them over to the left side of the vehicle, which makes adjustments easier later down the road. And here we have both toe links attached to the servo saver. All I have to do is tighten down the hardware now. We'll set this aside and install it in the truck after we do the upper camber links. Here we have the front upper camber links. This is part number 3737A, and as you can see, it does come with some of the hardware necessary to install it, but we are going to need some additional screws to attach this particular ball end over here. Before we had these shoulder step screws, and these aren't going to work to install this particular style of tie rod. So you are going to need some additional hardware here. So luckily I did have some extra hardware on hand. These are 3x15mm button head screws, and I'm going to use these to install the tie rods that require additional hardware. So these tie rods come with an instruction manual, and I suggest that you do use them. They make life a lot easier to figure out where the tie rod goes. So here it'll show you how to build the left turnbuckle and the right turnbuckle for the Stampede, or if you have a Rustler or Slash, it's the same thing. So first up, I'm going to build the left camber link, and I'm going to just set it right above the instruction manual to make sure the notch is in the correct place, and then note what hardware I'm going to use on each side. So this requires the screw type ball on this side. I'm just going to go and pop it in, push it down on the table, and then it requires the standard ball on the other side. And just note that there is a difference in the flange. One side is larger than the other. The wider flange goes on the outside here. We'll just pop that on, and now our link is ready to be screwed onto the front suspension. Let me just build my right camber link now. Now this is ready to install. So now I'm going to start by installing the camber links here. And there was this little washer stuck to the front shock tower here. That gets removed because that's part of the old camber link system. And now I can screw in the new camber link. Just make sure that you have the indexing on the turnbuckles here on the correct side, so it'll make adjustments easier down the road. Now install the opposite side. And now you'll have to use the hardware that you supplied to install the outer part of the link. And remember, if you want, you could add Loctite to these to make sure that they do not come off. So as you can see here, the screw is a bit longer than it should be, but what you could do later on is actually add a lock nut to help secure that screw in to make sure it never comes out. There's the upper camber link installed on both sides. And now we'll install the steering toe links again with the servo saver. Just slip the servo saver back in, make sure it's centered. I took it off when it was centered. And I could just slip the links back on the outside of the steering knuckle. We'll install the retaining nut on both sides. And now we have our camber link and toe link installed, and they look really good. Made sure that the indexing line is on the correct side here, and everything moves nice and free. And once the wheels are on, we'll just double check that everything is set properly. Now it's time to swap out the back links, and these are a little bit more labor intensive because we have to get in here to this camber link screw, so it takes a little bit more work to get to, and I'm going to show you how to do it. First, I'm going to remove the outside link screw here. And on the other side, so we have the outside screws removed. Now it's time to get to the inside screws, and there's actually a couple ways to do that. One is you can remove the transmission from the back by removing the two top screws from the shock tower and the screws below, or you could try to remove the shock tower by removing the 4 screws that hold it down to the chassis and to the transmission. The only issue is the screws are a little bit difficult to get to, so it's your choice of which method you want to use. I'm going to remove the shock tower. I'm going to undo the motor connector so I can remove the shock tower completely. And I just kind of leave the screws in there for later. Now we can get to these screws much easier. Now we can install the rear turnbuckles, part number 3738A. Luckily, like the rest of the turnbuckles, these are already set to the correct lengths for this particular truck. These tie rods will require you to find your own hardware again. Again, I'm going to use these 3x15mm button head screws. Now I just have to make sure that the indexing line is on the correct side, and they are lined up with the indexing line here. Once I know that I have everything lined up properly, I'm going to use that 3x15mm hardware that I found in my toolbox to secure the new links. With the new links on, now I can just reinstall the shock tower. And I'll use the 3x15 screws to install the outside of the camber link. With the camber links now installed, I can plug my motor back in, and that's how the new camber link looks installed. Now I can go back and reinstall my shocks with the stock hardware. And that's how the shock looks once it's installed. Just double check to make sure that everything pivots nice and smooth. Now we'll repeat the process for the rear. And that wraps up our turnbuckle and shock cap install. As you can see, these parts look pretty cool. It improves the durability with the shock caps, and now we have adjustability here on the tie rods. Now normally I'd throw the tires back on, but I'm going to give you a sneak peek of the next part of this series. In the next part of our project, I'm going to install new tires with chrome rims, and I'm going to show you how to paint up the Bigfoot body and install all the chrome accessories that you could purchase for the body. I hope this video helped with your Traxxas project. Keep an eye out for the next part of our Traxxas Craniac makeover.